Say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
Good evening, everybody. It's nice to have a full room. Yeah, for a few minutes at least. We have a great agenda tonight. Just by way of modification of the agenda, I just want to point out to people that spoke on proposals to take the agenda. We're going to take up, just in terms of order, we're going to take up master plan first. Because we have a team of people here who are from, some guests who are here to help us from KGMD. And then we'll go to achievement report, the budget resolution, and then the discussion about policy stewardship, and then the rest of the agenda. So I just wanted to note that change in terms of order. The items remain the same. With that, can I have a motion to accept the agenda as proposed? Dr. Francis? I'm sorry. I think we're going to add the discussion on lighting to, it'll be as part of the master plan discussion. So it'll be an item at the end of the master plan because it relates to facilities. Is the way I think we'll take that up, or that's just the way Dr. Gilday and I talked about taking it up. Okay. Is there an objection to that? Would you rather have it as a discrete item?
I would, but
Okay, well then why don't we do it that way?
I contemplated it this way, so
Okay, why don't we do it that way? So immediately after, I would propose that immediately after master plan update, which will be item 1 in discussion, that we take up the subject of temporary lighting at Central Middle School. So we'll add that item to the agenda. So that's, I believe that we add that to our agenda. Second, Dr. Francis. All those in favor of adding that to our agenda? That would be 8-0. So now, can I have a motion to accept the agenda as revised? All those in favor? So with that, the agenda is before us. We'll take up the first item, which is introducing, a lot of fun, introducing new administrators who are leading various parts of the district. Mr. Stacy.
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. So it's my pleasure to introduce to the public tonight several new administrators that we have that have joined our team here over the course of the summer. So I'd like to start off first with Carrie Borcherding. Carrie, go ahead, stand up here. You get to stand and be recognized. Carrie's joined us in terms of being promoted to a PPS coordinator for the district. So welcome, Carrie.
thank you.
Lori Elliott. Next up, Lori has come to join us from Arizona as our program coordinator for humanities. Bob Henson, who now has the shortest ride on the train all the way from Old Line, joined us recently as our program coordinator for media. So welcome. Brian Keating, joining us as the interim program administrator for Windrow. He's also part of that team. Katie Natal, joining us as the interim assistant principal for a leave in Old Greenwich, to fill in for Abby while she's out having her first baby. So thank you. Michael Reed, joining us as the assistant principal at North Street School from his position as instructional coach. Braulio Santiago. Braulio is joining us as our adult continuing education administrator. Came to us from CES, where he was part of the turnaround school initiative there. So welcome, Braulio. If you know if anybody wants to do part-time ELL, let Braulio. Kathleen Smith Ramirez came for the cookies, and she gets to leave as the assistant principal of Glenville Elementary School. Folks that aren't with us this evening I'll recognize before I do the last two. So Safia Key was not able to join us this evening. She's the interim assistant principal was at JC for a short term, and now she's at Riverside for a period of time while we work on that search over at Riverside. And Daniel Watson, our new Director of School Facilities, was a little under the weather with a cold and got a doctor's appointment at night versus during the workday, so was not able to join us this evening. So 2 other special recognitions, I think you've seen them before, as 2 of our superstars, with Lori O'Donnell, our Chief Operating Officer, and Dr. Jill Gilday, our new Superintendent. Thank you, Mr. Sheriff.
Many meetings in.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. And good luck to all of you helping run the district. We're here to support you through the superintendent, but we know that what you do is probably a lot more important than what we do. So thank you very much for all your efforts on behalf of the 9,000 kids in Greenwich Public Schools. Yeah, you're welcome to stay as long as you want, but no one will be offended if you have to go on and do other things. With that, we're going to take
Smart people.
With that, we're going to get a master plan and update. I think we're going to hear first from Ms. O'Donnell and then first from KG&D.
You don't have to press the button.
Good evening. I just wanted to welcome KG&D here. They will be presenting the facilities master plan that they've been working on. It's a 15-year plan. It will be including infrastructure needs and next generation schools. And we will be using that information to inform our FY19 capital plan and the next 15 years. So with that, I'd like to welcome Russ Davidson. And Eric.
Awesome. So hi, this is really just a progress report. We don't have a big presentation tonight, so there's no PowerPoint. We've been very busy, and I guess the biggest task has been integrating the facilities assessment we've done to date with your existing CIP. So we've been working with Lori to try and mesh those 2 things, and between the both of us and Dan, who's brand new, trying to figure out what some of that stuff is. But it looks like that's mostly done right now. And the first few years of the new plan will contain many items from the former plan, so that principals will get what was expected. But after probably year 2 or 3, a lot of the older plan stuff will be replaced by what's been identified in the newer plan. We've also come to understand how things are funded in Greenwich, which is unique. And we've added...
Maybe you can tell us.
Excuse me?
Maybe you can tell us.
Well, what we mean is there's things that are subject to sort of building committee type funding. There's annual capital funding. Yeah, I thought so, but...
Just checking, right? No, it's an interesting process.
Yes. So anyway, we've added a column so we can sort things by funding type, which is very helpful in sort of comparing where you are and where you're going forward. We've also created different types of work in categories. So I would say that from the infrastructure and facilities assessment, the tool is built, this giant spreadsheet of many rows, about 27 pages. And then we're going to be working with both your technology leadership and security leadership to make sure technology infrastructure and security infrastructure is integrated, because to date we haven't had any input from them, and that's obviously very important things. And then our next steps really on that is to work with Lori and Dan and Eric and I and go through it and through it and through it and validate projects and priorities. But I think we're really ready to accelerate that process. And of course, in our work with your subcommittee were really focused on fiscal year 19 as well, because we need to get something out there early. And generally, we're looking at 4 categories of work. One which is broadly called infrastructure, which does include a number of items from your existing capital plan that were expected to happen. It does include some indoor air quality and air conditioning issues. Right now, that number is trending at around 14 million, but we're tasked to get that number down and refine it and validate everything that's in it to make sure it is really necessary. The second category is ADA or accessibility work. There's 4 elevators that need to be installed. That work totals about 3.2 million, and we've got to decide how that's going to be phased out, or if it's going to be done in 1, 2, 3, 4 years. But we heard very clearly from the board subcommittee that accessibility is a priority, and we need to get on with it. The playing field at Hamilton Avenue has been discussed, and we've seen the different options there. So that's likely to be in the fiscal year 19 as well. And then there's this issue of program improvements. Lori mentioned that we presented on Next Generation Schools, and really most of that work is yet to be developed. That was purposeful, that we sort of delayed that work, and we're starting to develop that, but still in fiscal 19, it would make sense to introduce some of that work so you could start to move along that pathway. And we're looking at some of the more simple items to figure out, like classroom furniture, incubator projects to renovate 2 or a handful of rooms at a few buildings, just to see how this works and sort of flesh out what really works best for Greenwich. And then also continuing some things that you've already started, which are certainly next generation schools, like conversion of learning commons and continuing with your family and consumer science initiatives. So it's going to be this sort of balanced bit of work that has 4 parts, and we had a really good committee meeting yesterday, and so we'll be back at that. I would also just, there's been a lot of discussion as we've been in the plan about the New Lebanon School. And we've reviewed that building, we've reviewed the studies, we've seen the educational specs, and we've seen the plans. And I guess to state it simply, it seems very obvious that the board and the districts made an excellent decision to replace that building. It's just not tenable. It's a very difficult building and site configuration. And one thing that's really good about it is we've seen the ed specs and the plans. And that's actually going to inform the ed specs for the rest of the elementaries. So as the master plan goes forward, we'll work to have sort of a uniformity of approach, and that building is certainly leading the way. So I mentioned on my way into the board president that this is my 7th meeting in Greenwich this week, and that includes 4 public forums. And I would say, I'm not going to report out on each one of them because I'm still absorbing it, but they have been, we had one with faculty at Central, and then Western, Central, and Eastern. The people who came were engaged, but I'd say the crowds were as low as 10, as much as 20, so not big crowds. I think people really appreciated the opportunity to have input. Some people really wanted more data. They wanted more detail on the schools, and we really haven't developed that, and it hasn't been sort of approved. So I can understand some people's frustration with that. But generally, people really thought, first of all, it's an excellent thing that the board is doing this plan. That was very clear, and generally it was well received. Some of the specific comments that we heard, we did hear from an English teacher at Central Middle School that the classroom does work differently, and that she was very much in support of the Next Generation Schools discussion, because classroom instruction is nothing like, come take your seat, sit down, I'm going to talk to you. There's a lot of movement. She described it as coming together, going to work in small groups, coming back together, and we've heard a lot of support for addressing the issue of next generation schools. Some of the more specific things that we heard was the gym at Central is bad. The boys' locker room is very bad. And that the size of really the gyms at all the middle schools should get a close look. We did hear that we should consider town use. There was one individual who was very concerned about the equitable allocation of resources. So I know across your district that's going to be a difficult and challenging balance to make sure that people get things. There was also concern about different populations have higher needs, maybe they should get things first, and I deferred to the board on that. I said that's not a facilities issue. So you'll have that one. We did hear from almost each of the groups that accessibility's got to be a high priority. That we heard that the computer spaces at the high school were weak. We heard a lot about playing fields. This did cross over into a Cardinal Field stakeholder input meeting because it is part of the facilities. We did hear about synthetic turf playing fields should be installed at middle schools, and lights. So you're going to take that up later, I guess, temporary lights, but there was obviously some concerns about the change of hours and the availability of playing fields. We did hear a little skepticism on the next generation schools discussion, that people want to make sure it's data-driven and that they're really worth doing and that it works. And more than once we heard, don't make open classrooms again, because I think that was Glenville 2, which you took down, because last night we heard about Glenville 1 and 2 and 3, so one individual who's experienced all three. The talk about daylighting and sustainability, I would say, was pretty much very well received, where we talked about that. There was some very specific concerns about the front entrance and the driveway at Eastern. And we had one written comment card on ISD, which talked about the lack of parking, the proximity to the street, the bus and drop-off congestion, and overcrowding. So that's just a sort of general overview. There was a lot more discussion than that, and I'm hoping that Lori and maybe Debbie and other people there can share their notes so that we can collate it well. There's also been comments posted online which were forwarded to us, and we will certainly take those into account. Overall, I would say it was great to give everybody the opportunity, and it was successful, but I think that we might want to modify our process and do maybe a second overall meeting when the plan's a little bit closer to final. And when we do that, we should get information out in advance so people have time to look at it. I think we did the best we could given where we were. A couple of meetings this week were also about the Cardinal Stadium project, and just since we're here on the master plan as well, that's going very well. It's a great committee. I would say it's a great example of like minds working together, create a better product than any one of us on our own. And so we've got 3 refined options that we're putting budgets to, and we look forward to sharing with those with the board at your October 19th meeting to get your feedback.
Russ, I think we're going to take questions, but just one question in terms of the forums. Is that level of attendance based on your experience with high-performing suburban districts like ours, think of Westchester, is that kind of a typical level of engagement?
I wasn't that surprised by it.
Okay.
The one superintendent once told me that we're apathetic here, but we have positive apathy. And so I saw people who were there were very engaged, and it was good. I think it was mostly in relation to the time of year, which is very busy, and the first night was a high school football game, and people were there. And, but also the stage we are at the process, we thought we'd be a little further along at this point, and because of all good reasons, we had to keep things kind of general, and people are sort of anxious for a little more substance, so.
Questions? Anybody? Dr. Francis?
I'm sorry, I have to ask this question again, which is, when you gave that range based on our, I forget the number, $9 billion, whatever our total properties are, and you said there's, sorry, 1 billion, all our properties are, but there's a certain percentage that typically would be expected to be spent on a yearly basis for upkeep. The question I had asked, and I thought I understood the answer, and then I heard more, and then I thought maybe I hadn't understood the answer, was there's what we do every year, fixing the leaks, doing the things, and then there's the, Glenville, the roof needs to be fixed, there's no walls, so basically fixing it means putting a new building there. Do you include the cost of Glenville averaged out over some time into that yearly number that you estimate? Or is that really considered separate? So are you comparing what we see as a 10 million to should be 18 to 50, or is it 10 million plus Glenville spread out over 50 years and, those kinds
It's a
of
little
things?
bit of both, but that number, which I don't think people should latch on to as being gospel or law. It's a guideline that's out there. But that's capital maintenance, that's annual capital maintenance. So that's not building replacement, that's not program improvements.
Right.
So like your MISA project, that wouldn't be in that number.
Right.
A building that's done, aged out 30 years or 50 years old, that wouldn't be in that number. That number is really to keep what you have in good overall working condition. That's what annual capital maintenance is generally defined as.
But Russ, just to Dr. Francis's point on that, the number that the guideline that you provided us the last time we met, I have it somewhere in my notes. Is that a good guide? We probably need a number that's a guideline.
Well,
our board of estimate and taxation particularly, as well
Right,
as
well,
representative town
we
meeting.
can try and benchmark some other things, but the process that you've commissioned is the best way to do it.
Okay.
Just actually do a physical,
Right.
figure out what you need, put a dollar value to it. And if that comes out to, be 10% of your replacement value, we might think, well, that's a little high, but the fact is that I believe this process sort of trumps any sort of
Benchmark.
guideline,
Yeah.
benchmark.
Okay.
But it does, you'll see shortly that, there is significant needs
Yeah.
in the categories we've all talked about.
Ms. Applebaum.
So we've had multiple conversations. I'm perhaps a little more abreast of some of the information. I know when we're talking about some of the accessibility needs in certain schools, we were also talking about schools overall where either the ease of adding that accessibility or the number of renovations that have occurred within a specific building made the building challenged, that it might need other things. And I just was going to ask what I'm sure is probably going to happen anyway, but as you work with Lori and Jill, just figuring out so that we're not trying to put in an elevator and accessibility in a building where we might be making different adjustments, and that be figured out going forward.
Right, absolutely will happen. That's this sort of second half, and then there's a reintegration of the sort of infrastructure with the program improvements. But, if we find that a building needs $12 million worth of infrastructure and $20 million worth of renovation to serve as a next generation school, and it's can be replaced for 40, the decision may be, let's only do what we have to and work to get that building in a replacement schedule. And that may happen with parts or all buildings when we're at this table in the November-December timeframe. So that's sort of the next wave of bigger considerations that's going to come as part of this. And I think that's one of the reasons this was commissioned, because you've had some difficult decisions on other replacement buildings.
Ms. Staton.
Have you seen in other districts when there is a
an addition put onto a school building or a new building put in place of an existing building, that the capital maintenance amount of dollars is reduced, almost like a compensation mechanism, because we're spending on new construction, so now we're pulling dollars out of maintenance, so everything sort of evens out? Or do you find that districts have committed to a number for capital maintenance year after year, if it's 10 million or whatever it is, and then if additions are needed, that's considered a separate project, separate dollars?
So I think I understand the question, but it's complicated. The newer your buildings are, the lower your annual capital maintenance. So you got a lot of new buildings, that number does go down. But you have a lot of buildings. And I keep going back to the 455,000 square foot Greenwich High School, largely 1970. It's not that it's a money pit, but there's almost no amount of money you can't spend there to improve it. And well, it needs a lot. I mean, there's windows, there's entrances. You know, there's not a lot of windows in the building. It's not really have ample daylight. The science wing, which people still refer to as the new science wing, is almost 25 years old, and it needs a lot of work. So I'm not so sure building additions or replacing a building or two in a district of your size are going to have any impact on your annual capital maintenance, is my point.
Well, should not have.
It should not.
Should
And you know, we heard from some people at the forums, interestingly, because we have things on there for Glenville and Hamilton Avenue. They're like, wait, that's a new building. I said, well, 5 and 10 years old already, and you need to maintain new buildings. You may get a 3 to 5 year holiday, but then got to get back at it and keep up with them because that's what extends their lives.
Other comments? Ms. Anderson?
I just want to comment because we did have a very productive ad hoc meeting yesterday, and I think the board made a wise decision to give us more time to bring the capital plan to the board, because I think we had Dan Watson with us yesterday as well as Lori, and we do have a couple iterations that need to happen to reconcile the projects that were in last year's capital plan for this year and the priorities that were identified by KG&D. I also want to point out, in addition to the 4 areas that the projects are being slotted into, they're also employing a rating system so we can have a better idea of what's maybe a safety issue or a code issue versus what's, I don't want to say desired, but what's, not up to that level of need. They also have their eye on other projects that typically fall into other areas of town. For instance, paving needs, typically DPW does it for us. But we haven't really been looking at that schedule, who does it, so they're looking at that as well. And along with Parks and Rec, the responsibilities that Parks and Rec typically does for our properties and fields, they're looking at that too. So it really is a holistic, cohesive, comprehensive view of our 1.5 million square feet of real estate and associated facilities. So it's really a Herculean effort. I think it's been moving right along, and I think we'll be pleased when we get the result and can start talking about substance. But I do think it's important that we do start talking about the numbers that we have had typically as our annual maintenance, per Ms. Dayton's point, are not sufficient. So we need to start getting everyone to that next level in order to have the kinds of buildings that we want to show to our public.
I think that was made in the meeting, even though we didn't go through all the numbers. I think in the last update we had, you guys kind of made that clear, that we're not running fast enough to keep up with it, right? Mm-hmm. So then the question becomes, what is the right number? What is the right schedule? And I think you guys are on track. If I heard you right, Russ, so you guys are on track with Lori and Jill and the team to present that with us in November.
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to point out also that we had because we met with the town departments on the stadium project, they asked us to come back and talk about the master plan. So Lori, Dan, and I were over at Town Hall this afternoon with all the town departments, briefing them on the master plan, which is very helpful. So really starting to connect the dots on things like paving and fields and because there's been a lot of transition, a lot of information is now starting to really flow, which is going to make this plan all better.
I will recognize Mr. Persix's question, but I just want to be clear. The master plan we talked about these are all Board of Ed properties. It's a little gorpy about, hey, Parks and Rec takes care of our
Yep.
grass
No,
and what
no.
have you. That's like, to me, that's
We're
like...
very, you're very clear as a board with what we're supposed to do.
Right.
What-
Give us
no
the whole
matter who
plan.
pays for
Right.
it,
Give us the whole
identify
plan.
it,
Right,
schedule it,
right.
and if it doesn't match the DPW paving schedule, which we got this afternoon,
That's part two.
that's part two.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bernstein?
I guess my concern is November and capital planning is a lot closer than we probably want to admit. How are you starting to prioritize? And I heard you mention the 11-on field. Where are you getting the direction from as to what that ought to look like so that when it comes back to the board, we have a sense of that? And that field.
Well, we've been given, I think, 3 or 4 options for repair, so we got that information fairly recently. We'll review it and talk with Lori and Dan and come back to you with the recommendation.
I guess the follow-up more generally though is, when you come back to us in November, are you going to have your list prioritized? Is it going to be in the buckets we're talking about, or is it going to be from highest priority to lowest, so that if we say, okay, here's the dollar amount we think that we're going to be able to sustain things below the line, we're going to have to get pushed for next year? I'm just trying to mentally
Well, I actually think that Lori's going to come back to you with that plan, because we don't prioritize in a vacuum. And one of the things that's been a challenge for us is that we've been on our own, because typically the process that's now going with Lori and Dan was supposed to have started in late May, but we didn't have a Lori or Dan, so it will be prioritized when it comes to you, and the board subcommittee will have seen it, and it'll be ready to go at what everybody believes is a realistic level.
I mean, the capital plans of old, and Peter, Barbara, and Jennifer can attest to this. The administration came in with a list, figured out what the dollar amount was, and stuff got locked off the bottom. And then you kind of fought to try to get it back on. I think we want to avoid that.
Any other questions? I have one. I had just one more. This is a scheduling question, so I don't know if you can answer it. The last update we got was very much focused on the buildings. And
Yep.
it was very helpful, complete, and illuminated the buildings. As part of this, though, the master plan, if I heard properly, I have a great fixation on the grounds, sports fields, the rest of it. It's like my,
You are not alone.
it's like my pet thing. So, but I understood last time when we talked about it, that there was someone in your office, landscape architect, people who were working on that. My question is, from schedule, when, like what we saw for buildings, are we going to see the assessment, similar assessment for the grounds, particularly fields, playgrounds, etc.? When are we going to see that?
Well, let's talk to Lori and Jill, but we could do that as part of the 19th, since we're doing Cardinal Stadium. It might be a good time to also do the fields part. That part is ready,
Okay.
and again, we've been sort of just waiting for
No, I know that. That's what I'm just-
feedback on it, and it's, we do have a landscape architect in our office, and we
Okay.
have this
So
awesome
that'll be
chart,
part of the-
awesome chart of acreage and parking spaces and playgrounds and play fields.
So that'll be the night, in the update on the 19th.
If you'd like, I think we could do that.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions for on this item? No, thank you very much for the update.
Okay, thank you.
We're on to our next item, which is it's the attempt lighting. Let me just, I think the board's familiar with this, but let me start the conversation by putting this motion on the table, and then we can discuss. Just by way of review, the motion was circulated and it had been reviewed by the law department. They made some specific additions, which you will, I think, most of you have seen. So I'm going to make the motion. I hope there's a second. The Board of Education, I move that the Board of Education authorizes the superintendent of schools to obtain temporary lighting to illuminate athletic fields at Central Middle School Further, the board authorizes the superintendent to obtain all regulatory approvals, including, but not limited to, municipal improvement and site plan approvals necessary to install and use temporary lights at Central Middle School.
Second.
Mr. Bernstein, seconds. Is there discussion about this? I think we're pretty clear what we're trying to do, right? And we're trying to, sorry, Jennifer, yes.
Yes, I'd just like to comment that I look forward to a detailed plan for the board and the community to review as to who's playing where, what field, and when the lights will be shining, and how many days they'll be shining, and all of that, so that we have full information going out to the public.
Okay. Just so that you're aware, this motion will essentially authorize the superintendent to go forward.
I know.
So that update would just be by way of update. It wouldn't be something we'd get before Dr. Gilday would move forward.
Okay.
If this motion is accepted. Ms. Applebaum.
Just for clarity, I wanted to understand at what point and how in the process, with this motion having just come now, and this is a work session versus a business meeting, when and how will it be facilitated for public comment before we might vote on this?
It's proposed, it's unusual, I know. This would be before us, as we discussed last night, for an immediate vote, because time is of the essence, and therefore Dr. Gilday needs to get a signal from us whether or not we support this. So I know normal course of business would be we'd take it up at a work session and then we'd see it at a regular meeting. This one's going to be a little bit unusual. The motion is before us to vote on it this evening.
Because just as follow, I know that there were issues in the past with traffic associated with events and things happening at Central Middle School, and the local neighbors had some concerns, and I would not want them to feel that we were doing something that precluded their input, which is not our intention. And I think we have an immediate need, partly because of the change in school start time, to address additional access to fields and sports and things. So I completely understand the process and why. Even the way it's worded sounds like total fait accompli, which is we do want this to hopefully happen, but at the same point, not without all of the appropriate opportunities for public input. And I just want to make sure that that's clear and that they don't feel that they've been excluded.
You should probably consider that carefully in your, when you call the vote. Mr. Bernstein.
You know, I hang my hat on the fact that this is something that is immediate, it is necessary, it's a safety issue and a challenge for us. And then it's also temporary. This is not the permanent fix that we're all looking for. This is to get us through so that we have time to figure out what that permanent fix might be. You know, as I reread this several times today, this is about high school athletics. This is not a permanent field in town. This is not a Parks and Rec field. This is to alleviate the immediate issue about student safety and athletics in the dark. That's it in this story.
Ms. Erickson.
The issue I have with this is I think the board's moved a little faster than the public, so I'm a little concerned about this being presented this way without the opportunities for public input. This is not normally the way we would conduct business with our neighbors at any of our schools, also the community that impacts it. This motion assumes that we are able to get municipal improvement and authorization through the land use approval agencies in a certain number of weeks in order to alleviate the problem. To my mind, that's not assured. It may take longer than we think, and we should be pursuing multiple avenues to ameliorate the situation, which, as we discussed today at school start time, I know that there's possibility of renting other fields. I would hope that would take place. So to my mind, I am having trouble with the immediate need to have some lighted fields to allow the athletes to practice safely, with our responsibility to our central school community and the central neighbors. So while I support the essence of this motion, I'm really not prepared to vote on it tonight. If I can add a different slant, This is more of a procedural issue. I think historically, when there's an MI, it really needs to be a transmittal from the Board of Ed to the Board of Selectmen to act. I think that's the proper way to do it. It's what we did in Lebanon, and I think that's the course we should follow in this case.
So let me, I mean, I think we had a lengthy discussion about this, and the other thing, to Ms. Applebaum's point, you know, I, as an example, served on the Start Time Committee for months. And with all due respect, I know many of us, many people on the board were able to attend those meetings. Those meetings were held in the public, they were properly noticed. I think we're over-noticed. I mean, I don't know how many times we met. This idea is not a new idea. It's been discussed in that committee for a while. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be, I agree with you, it makes me uncomfortable skipping over the public. But for me, this is trumped by, we have an urgent situation on our hands. And I would hope that we would trust that by putting this in the hands of the superintendent and authorizing her to proceed, that, and I'm quite confident, the superintendent will pursue this appropriately. If it turns out it becomes an issue, I think we've said, let's put our superintendent in the position to handle that. So this is really authorizing her to execute this. I'm comfortable putting my trust in her, but I think we have to enable her to be able to proceed.
I don't see where they're mutually exclusive. I think we can move forward with this, and meanwhile, have the public comment.
Sure.
So so I'm fine, because there will be, this MI isn't gonna happen overnight, we know that. So as that takes up time, we have lots of time to get input from the public and to give the public an opportunity to speak at the meeting. So I'm okay with this because there is that opportunity, and I agree, there should always be public opportunity to speak. But I also think the safety of the children is really important, so I think we should do both.
Who's going to go first? Ms. Rega.
Also, the public has also expressed their opinion through the numerous emails that we get. So I know it's not in a meeting format, but it isn't like we haven't heard what the public is thinking.
Ms. Applebaum.
So just from a process standpoint, because I'm not sure that the superintendent can't begin the process, because there are multiple steps even to get to the first step of this, why we could not delay a vote until next meeting. That doesn't stop the process of starting. So I'm just wondering whether we need to have a compromise.
Yeah, I think, to answer your question, according to the, this is, I mean, I suppose you could make it that way, but this essentially says to the superintendent that they're authorized to start the process of pursuing the regulatory reviews. I think, as we've discussed, has to go to MI, has to go to planning and zoning. That's the law in Greenwich. That's what it is. But, it seems to me that to the degree we can provide clarity to the superintendent to start that process as quickly as possible. By the way, if you can wind up getting in front of the Board of Selectmen on municipal improvement, and you can wind up getting a special meeting of planning and zoning before the 19th, I think, as we discussed yesterday, it's urgent. I think we thought it was urgent, and I think we thought we needed to move it forward. The question is, what level of oversight does the board want to have in that at every step of the process? Given what it is, it's temporary lighting. My proposal is, let's put that authority in the hands of the superintendent, and I'm quite comfortable that she'll properly manage it. That's my own personal view. Dr. Francis.
I was going to start by just saying ditto in terms of Barbara, which is, yes, of course, we always want input, but in this circumstance, I think we need to allow this to move forward. I think the first step is to support those steps. I think, there certainly are other opportunities, whether it's in our meetings, whether it's in the MI process and other places, for there to be public comment with regards to this. And if it turns out that we're able to rent other fields or do other things, and there's pushback from the community, and we don't feel like we can find something that's appropriate and comfortable for the neighbors, this does not require us to put the lights up. It just allows us to start that process of asking and trying to figure it out.
Ms. David.
I'm comfortable with the approach of the vote tonight only if there's a communications plan to the public that's immediate, as in this week, saying what's coming, especially for that neighborhood, then I'm comfortable.
Can you commit that?
Yeah, we commit that. We've already asked for the list. We've already asked for the GIS
Okay.
list from town, so we at least know we're starting.
Sounds like you guys have got that in hand. Okay, with that, anything further? I'm gonna call a question. Does anybody need to hear a motion again? No, okay. All those in favor of the motion to authorize the superintendent to obtain temporary lighting to eliminate athletic fields at Central Middle School? All those against? All those abstaining? That passes 6-1-1. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to our next item, which is the achievement report by Dr. Gilday and Mr. Dunn. Just need 1 second. Yes. Just make sure I'm talking.
All right, while still setting up, I will just share that this is a high-level achievement report. It is not a data dive at this moment. As of today, we received our ECRA growth model update from last year, so we're still in the process of gathering and reviewing data from last year. So it's autopsy data, I understand that, but this is aligned to the strategic initiatives, and we're going to give you at least this high-level overview. My hope is that based on your feedback related to this report, we will then take that next step to see if you are in need of a deeper data dive. Happy to do a data-specific workshop. Also, as soon as we get our portal updated, then of course the board does have that data, which will eventually be a public dashboard, which is pretty exciting. So that is all still in play and in progress. So we've got lots of great data, lots of great analysis from that via ECRA, and making good growth, even to the point that we're able to pull some of our programs so that schools themselves can look at what they did over the summer with their identified targeted students, and they can look and click on the kids and see how they're doing. So they're starting to do all of that work and sharing their success stories or sharing a challenge, and they are really using the data. So it's really exciting. We just heard about that from our principals even as late as today.
Sorry, I just wanted to be able to cue my iPad. Sorry about that. 60 seconds more. Thanks. I should probably just go low tech and use the clicker.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share with the rest of the board and just pat ourselves on the back kind of thing. While I was up at CES today, I was talking with a board member from Westport, and I was actually talking about our ECRIS portal and the data that we are collecting and our growth models that we have. And the reaction was, oh my goodness, you guys are always right at the forefront. You're the first to do everything. You're so lucky. So I just wanted to share that and pass that on to the administrators and the people involved. Thank you very much.
Okay, just about ready.
We love the technology.
Over engineering solutions.
talk a little more, Phil?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we've invested in it, so we love using it.
You must use it. All right.
You can
we'll
just click from the laptop, though.
It's okay.
Companies have been doing this for 20 years now.
All right, so we'll keep it boring. So, it's been a long day in the boardroom here. So, good evening, and as Dr. Gilday said, we are rethinking how we have this discussion around performance. So what I'd like to discuss this evening is just to first check in on the outcomes from the strategic plan, And this report will largely serve as that check-in. And then I'd like to discuss the framework for how we would like to continue this, what I call dialogue around performance throughout the year. One of the things we've learned is that this is a very complex ecosystem. And with the novelty of the strategic plan having come around, we're able to take that complexity and boil it down into 13 outcomes that really act as focal points for the organization. So in working within the great plan of the strategic plan and really well thought out outcomes, we are being more thoughtful in terms of how we continue a dialogue around performance throughout the year. Where for the probably millions of items of data that are available throughout the organization, we're trying to be very strategic about carefully framing issues in a timely fashion and in a way that presents a series of policy options that we could levy or use your assistance in resolving. So things are a little bit different with this report, but it all makes sense. Just to jump into it, I talked a little bit about the strategic plan, and I'm not showing the slide. There we go. So just to check in on the strategic plan, we have 3 different types of outcomes that we have defined as being desired for the organization. We have academic goals, and there are 5 measures there. That's what we're going to discuss this evening. We have interpersonal goals or student well-being goals, which we're not discussing this evening, but are very, very important as we kind of look at this whole child development, and as we've done some great work, this board has done really great work to quantify and define the vision of the graduate with specificity. And finally, we have personal goals that also speak to that holistic development of both community and students within it. So, as you can see here, the meat of this report basically is a reporting out on the 5 academic outcomes contained within the strategic plan. The color coding represents, in green, those measures we believe, based on the evidence we have, we're on track to achieve this year. The things that are color-coded yellow represent those measures that, while within our reach, may take more than this year, but we actually do feel pretty confident that we're progressing toward our goal. And that was some of the novelty of the strategic plan, in that it aligns with all the kind of macro research that says that there are very few whole district treatments that you can implement that really change things significantly within 1 year, right? Especially a 10-month academic year. So the 5-year strategic plan is something that we're very thoughtful of in our timing of how we achieve our goals. And finally, you'll see a goal designated or denoted in red, which to us really represents an aspirational goal. And the thing that I just want to emphasize is in regard to the percentage of tests wherein students demonstrate expected or greater growth, we're really talking about the growth model that was just kind of on the floor we were talking about a moment ago. And the growth model, just to simplify the explanation, is kind of centered around that 84% figure. So the growth model always expects mathematically that 84% of students, or excuse me, 84% of tests will have students demonstrate expected or greater growth. So to achieve greater than that, right, and we have a desired outcome of 90%, that's a really hard goal to hit, and it's a very good aspirational goal. And in addition to that, it's very, if not difficult, if not impossible, to continuously hit that 90%, because every time you reach that 90% threshold, the model resets and it raises the expectation. So again, just not to over-compliment, but this is a really great body of work in the strategic plan in terms of having a plan that's adaptive, and as we achieve goals, it actually raises the bar. It's very balanced. So just to stay on this slide again for a moment, you see here that for the targets that were articulated that the organization achieved by 2020, we feel pretty good about 40% of them this year, and we see another 40% within the horizon. And finally, with consistent focus and deliberate focus, we have that aspirational goal for growth. Now, jumping into performance generally or nominally, just in terms of the percentage of students meeting or exceeding benchmarks, you see here reflected SBA performance in each of ELA and math. We've often, at different points in our conversation, have had questions about how this data can be disaggregated into discrete groups of students that don't overlap. So you see that reflected here. We're very attentive to this within the organization, and kind of going back to this idea about having a consistent dialogue in different structures, right? We believe that chunking out how we strategically analyze data throughout the year will give us the best possibility of addressing the various needs within different programs and different groups of student need. So we don't sit and take comfort that, for example, 86.8% of our students that we would consider in the general education program are meeting or exceeding GLA benchmarks. We don't take comfort in that because we know that the work is to focus on those other groups of students and getting them the appropriate supports, and we have to do that very strategically throughout the year. And just to check in for a moment on the timeline, traditionally, SBA results start trickling into the district in late August. This year was actually the earliest we've ever seen a preliminary release, which happened, I believe, in July, right? We're still waiting on the final release of district-wide results on science. And because we're in communication with the state, we have some intimation as to how things are going throughout the state. But again, this complex ecosystem where when we do our critical planning work during the summer, it often occurs in the absence of these key pieces of information. When we ramp up our school improvement and our planning efforts, at best we may just be getting our growth metrics. So a lot of the shift is in deference to the intricacy of the balance within that timeline. So again, we hope to be talking a lot about this soon. Moving into CMT and CAP, we have the CMT in grades 5 and 8. We have CAP at grade 10. Just to speak verbally to the trend, we did have a slight decline in the percentage of students meeting or exceeding benchmark in science, but the state, from what we understand, actually had a pretty significant decline itself. So what we expect is that we will actually improve in our percentile ranking throughout the state. That is not reflected in this report because there has not been a final data publication, but from our preliminary indications, we expect that we actually will have improved in regard to our standing throughout the state.
Just clarification, Phil, that's why this NA is here?
Yes, that is correct.
On the scorecard?
Yes, pending the final release from the state.
Do you know when that's anticipated?
We've been told we should expect it this month from both A, Chris, and a G.
He was a wonderful guy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Here you see outcomes reflected in the Connecticut School Day SAT. Again, these statistics are included within the body of the report. They're here for our reference, and if nothing else tonight, we'd like to just kind of talk about how we're framing the work. So here you have, again, and just generally in regard to Greenwich High, it is a very, very high performing high school throughout the state. It is just a phenomenal, phenomenal high school, a phenomenal education program. So a lot of our efforts are spent trying to refine how we think about targeted groups of students that need support within that environment. And what I'd like to really start talking about in a more deliberate way is the structure and how we're thinking about working on this work throughout the year. So what we're proposing is that, go ahead.
Just ask the board, before we move on to talk about how we're going to work in the future, does anybody want to talk about the current data? Do we want to hear the whole thing? How do you want to do this? Oh, okay.
That is technology working.
Keep going.
I'm not rolling downhill. So throughout the year, what we intend to do is to have the achievement reporting serve as almost a high-level scorecard, aligning with that great balanced series of measures that speak to the vision of the graduate and the whole student development. And in a sense, that kicks off the conversation for the year. Then throughout the year, we'll have monitoring reports, which will be structured to, by and large, provide updates on new assessment data, so you get a sense of progress on plan. So we make that prediction at the start of the year, given the evidence, and when we have things like the STAR benchmark window, for example, or when we analyze data from the summative unit assessments, or even when we have data from key digital instructional resources, we will, within the confines of those monitoring reports, have that quantitative reporting out. The qualitative is something that we hope to address within the confines of program histories. And we're thinking of that as a structure where we can kind of get really deeply into both the history of a program and its evolution from a qualitative perspective, almost like an ethnography in a sense, where there are some implementation details within a program that really don't externalize or pop in a way that you want them to when you just look at a data report. So we hope to have some structures throughout the year where you kind of get a deep, rich qualitative dive within a program. And finally, we hope to hold a few data retreats throughout the year where we can, again, very, very complex ecosystem. And in the past, we would skin the onion within meetings like this, and we start with a very 30,000 foot view and try to go to 2 feet above the ground. And we'd end up with like a parking lot of 50,000 different things. And it was very hard to roll them back up in a way that was really supportive and offered a framework for the whole district. So we hope to have data retreats where we can do the hard work of rolling up our sleeves, laptops out, Excel will access all the data tools, and we can see those implementation KPIs. We can look at things like how the number of hours that teachers receive within professional learning co-varied with actual outcomes within a defined treatment period, largely aligning with those benchmark windows, which we use with the growth model to understand what's working and what's not working. So we want to do that in-depth work in a way that's very deliberate, very strategic, and in a way where there's a productive partnership that helps us identify barriers that take all of our efforts to remove. So the penultimate outcome of this reporting, as I say here, will be the creation of what we're calling a system of student support. And there's an old saying, old kind of funny, you know me and my folksy analogies for those of you who work with me. But people will say athletes are paid what they're paid when you look at these superstar athletes. Not because they get a result, but because they reliably get a result. So a lot of our strategic focus is creating a system that renders explicit the dependencies within the system and the pathways through which actions and interventions cause outcomes. That's a lot of our focus. So we'd like to become a learning organization even more than we already are today. We would like to have a system of explicit adult actions that are undertaken given conditions that present themselves with data and have it be memorialized and proceduralized so that this now becomes culture, it transcends people. It just is Greenwich. And that's what these touch points throughout the year are designed to help us collaboratively memorialize as we go through that. So to conclude, when we talk about a system of student support, we're talking about concrete deliverables around having well-defined learner goals. Things like a learner profile, which many of you, having worked within the ECRS platform or having received training in the ECRS platform, you see us iterating upon, where we hope to add interest inventories. We have KPIs like daily attendance. We have formative assessment, key formative assessment data for every student in this district going back several years in things like F&P and other critical tools. We hope to have student success metrics by grade and by subject area rendered explicit in everything that we do. So when we talk about things like the personalization of learning math pilot, we are now working within a framework where we have a hypothesis from the outset of the engagement. We have a research-based defined treatment that we've vetted with our vendor partners, and we've poured through the peer-reviewed research that each of these vendor partners that we're working with has provided. And then we're tracking the KPIs as we implement them, and we define them before we went out and started doing it. So it's really a new way of doing things we know and have tried to do in a very ad hoc kind of fashion, but we're putting it in a deliberate structure now. So that's the novelty here, and that's what you'll expect to see at these touch points throughout the year. Ms. Davey?
I have general and specific feedback. The general feedback is I love the penultimate outcomes. That systemic look at the whole organization, how every part of it contributes to the outcome of students. That's fantastic. Other general feedback, I know I'll be in the minority on this, but I don't need the qualitative program histories anymore. I've read them for 6 years. I would prefer to focus on the other 3 bullet points in that list. And particularly, I'm going to forget the wording, but I think it's data retreats. Is that the correct? We need that right before budget development because we need to invest in the programs that work and disinvest in programs that don't work. And I'm very much hoping, although the time frame is compressed, that we get a chance to do that, especially in a budget year where we have severe constraints put upon us by the RTM. We need to show proof of the results we're getting. So that's the general feedback. And now I'm going to give you specific feedback. It's clear our poor students are struggling in mathematics. I think there's a critical weakness with the math SAT as well as grades 3 to 8. I think that we should consider developing an SAT math program that is preparing students specifically for the ability to reach for a 4-year college. And I think the summer school review should look at participation and achievement by free and reduced lunch students in mathematics as one of the building blocks to getting better results. I know that math has been a focus of the district, it's not a new idea, but I think we need to start targeting that support.
Mr. Bernstein?
4 years ago, before you got here, we were measuring growth by comparing this year's fourth grade to last year's fourth grade. That's honestly how we were measuring growth. So this is great. You've got all the data, you're putting it together, you're doing analytics, not a word we were hearing in education for a long time. I guess the challenge is putting it to practice, right?
Yeah.
So you sit in Havemeyer, you sit with somebody who's data, savvy. You get out into the buildings and it's a little less data savvy. So I think when you come with your updates, because I'm happy we're going to have updates, I would like to learn about data in the wild, right? How's it doing in the buildings? Tell us success stories, tell us challenges, real world examples of what's working and what's not, I think are probably most interesting to the board so that it helps us formulate our work. I think Jennifer is right, program review is key here. We've never been able to do it to this level of detail. I also noticed the SAT gap. I was happy with the ELA for free and reduced. I thought that was actually a much higher number than I would have expected to see, but math is the reverse, and I think that's a challenge. So I'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Dr. Francis?
So I think some of this is a little bit repetition of what's been said, but I was going to sort of ask a question of, do we hope that in the future our SBA results will be coming a little bit earlier, and that I had sort of imagined as we were envisioning sort of looking at the data that we have and trying to get this in, that there would be kind of a review of how we do our SIPs, how we do our supplemental programs, and sort of a timeline of that. I think we started talking about that last year. So is that something that, maybe that's what you were saying and I kind of missed it, but is that part of sort of that plan of like how things are going to be moving forward?
Yes, so
We can't control the state's release of the SBA, so we just, and it changes every year. So we are aware that the SBA results are not consistent, and I think it just depends on what system the state is using, because they shift to, and they have 5-year contracts they have to adapt to and take different bids and things too. So we are not in control of when we get that, but obviously once we get that, then we feed that up through our eCris portal. And it usually does take a couple of weeks, to get everything all hashed out.
And just to share more information, this has been a challenge for us, and I talked about that delicate ecosystem and the dance and the timing and having trouble lining up. So the vision we're working toward is if we create enough feedback mechanisms that are reliably aligned throughout the different layers, right? Then you kind of know where you are. Regardless of the latest update, you have some foundational understanding. So we've done a lot of great work as a team, as a district, getting a comprehensive assessment system implemented, having universal screen benchmark assessments. We've provided a great condition, right, to give us a fighting chance in digital learning. So the next layer of the work is better understanding the correlations through those different layers of abstraction. We have provided 2 days of training to our leadership team this year on both, not only the tools themselves, the eCris portal, the tools within it, but Dr. Carabillo and I, Irene Parisi and I, Jen Lau sitting, and I have been working to build the capacity of the leadership team to better understand predictive analytics within the confines of that school improvement process. So that's the great thing about the growth model that we have here, is it gives us that information without that next release. Go ahead.
Not wanting to be repetitive either. I was almost going to start clapping when you finished your presentation. I've been dying for this simplicity and really easy way to understand what's going on. As soon as I saw the stoplight, I was like really happy. And I think the approach that you're going to take is just going to make the meetings that more effective. Jennifer, I think the program histories, as long as it's documented somewhere and in board docs or something for new board members, I think that's fine as well, and really do spend the time on the monitoring and the data retreats.
Ms. Erickson?
So I think I just have to comment that this year's achievement report looks a lot different from last year's achievement report, and I applaud the evolution because I think this is where the board needs to be. So I support the direction this is going. That being said, I want just to make a comment. I am a little bit wonky, so I did go on EdSite and I looked at our grade 3 by school. And what I hope and trust is happening is these kids who are not meeting level 3 and 4 are being targeted to. There's interventions, it's part of the school improvement plans, it's part of the teacher's work plan. Principals are on top of it. We don't need to worry about it as a board because you guys are doing the work and we'll see those results reflected next year and the following year. But there are still a lot of kids who aren't meeting goal in grade 3, and as long as you assure me that work is happening, I can get comfortable with this higher level, although I do like to look at all the numbers.
Well,
Trust will verify.
I think the data retreats, data dives, whatever cute term you want to use, I think gives you that time to really interact with the portal as a board and look at those things and look at the different disaggregations, because I think my hope is always to have every third grader at or above level. That's a great milestone for the district. It's a great report card milestone to hit. It's very focused and targeted for our pre-K 3. You actually know what you're aiming for, but it's my broader wish and hope and vision that every child, I think your top 4s need to show the blue growth. You know what I mean? So I want the growth for every learner, no matter where they start. I want to see that they are making those gains. I think that's the part of personalized learning that becomes, that vision and that realization of the system and optimization of the system, because it shouldn't, yes, you need this, what Phil described is exactly what we've been talking about. You have the system of support built in a way that everybody in the system relies on that backbone, that framework, and it helps every child move. Equity, access, opportunity, and targeted interventions that every teacher, has access to and knows, that it has good predictive ability to impact the learner. And that's why you're doing all this work. So it's really linking very nicely with our personalized learning strat plan. I'm excited about that.
Ms. Applebaum.
I just want to add my thanks and congratulations to the progress and the direction. I can visualize where it's going, and this is what we were looking for and how we wanted to get there. And sort of like in a big picture kind of way, do you have any sense of how long it might take to actually get to a point where it's considered the norm? Like we're still getting started with it. We're going to have our touch points, and I can visualize it, but that it's become standard operating procedure. Is it by the end of the year? Is it a couple of years? What should be reasonable expectations for us?
I used this system in my last district. It had been in place before I arrived. It was from 2003 that we had data, and we were still working on the refinement that Phil's talking about on the left. So it is something that it's a constant and continuous improvement growth, but it is, once teachers have this and have access to it, what I did find on my way out, the board was looking at maybe a less expensive alternative, and really the community and teachers and principals really fought to keep this particular model, because once they understood it and are using it for everything, it becomes your performance assessment for your administrators, it becomes your identifiers and double check for your different programs, EL, L, all of those programmatic wind up being very aggregated in how the kids are performing on this. So it really becomes a backbone, but it takes continuous iteration, growth, development. The part I would like to see, I'm hoping 3 years or less, will be this learner profile. And I think the learner profile, I've seen it in systems K-12, I've seen it already realized, so I know we can do it. It's just getting the partnership, again, with ECRA to get metrics we're all comfortable with, having that. They're kind of up there on the board. Those blue charts are kind of my visualization of that. Ours will obviously be personalized for our district, but you can see everything on there from student engagement, survey results, to community service, which is one of the things we measure, that students do to their attendance and their predictive analytics, all there, as well as whether they're on target for college career readiness metrics.
Dr. Francis.
So I was just off of the comments that Jennifer had made in terms of program reviewer. I recall us having conversations about sort of every intervention, everything we do, that eventually we're going to badge kid, it's gonna say, this is our intervention, and this is the success or not, and then looking at improving those or taking those that are good and making sure they're happening everywhere and addressing the ones that maybe we don't need anymore, how we're gonna do that. I think she was asking to have that before this November. I would say that I want it very well done, and I'm not convinced that if it's not gonna happen well, that I would ask to have it that soon. And I just wasn't sure if you wanted to give us feedback on that, because my priority would be to have it done well, not have it done not so well so soon.
Can we hold next steps to the end? Would that be okay? I wanted to say, Phil, thank you very much for the hard work. We made a commitment as a district to invest in this data infrastructure, and this is fantastic because this is what evidence-based management looks like. This is what it looks like at a board level, and I'm very comfortable, based upon what you presented, that we're now on a track to make that a completely cascaded system from the top to the bottom, all the way from what we look at the top of the system, the whole system, all the way down to the individual student. It's exciting, and anything that we can do to help accelerate, I'm very interested to hear. With that, could I ask some content questions?
Yes, please.
And I'll work from the lowest level, kind of from the bottom to the top, if that's okay. If I look on page 5, and I'm looking at Connecticut School Day SAT, these are kids who take the Connecticut School Day SAT in grade 12, right?
Grade
11, I'm sorry, in grade 11.
That's correct.
And the at benchmark and 11 mark is, because I will eventually have to connect this to our graduation requirements, this is at the level set by the state.
That's correct.
So it's, I forget what it is, it's a 440 or I forget what it is, out of 800. Anyway,
I have to look.
it's those standards is what we're talking about here.
That's correct.
Okay. The one other question I had is, I always worry about data that's in percentages because you don't know the percentages of what.
Yeah.
So could you just give me a sense of, and roughly, when I'm talking about general education, I'm talking about how many people in the student body? I mean, does general education represent 80%?
So what I did was just
Yeah, that's what I'm
the
trying
art of data viz, right? So I gave you the end, tally it, I'll just.
It's at the bottom, is what you're telling me?
Yeah, so you have the overall number of students in each of the test data sets.
Okay.
And then of that 598,
I just want
looking
to
at
confirm
ELA
that was
tests,
what you were.
70.3 of them are discretely, uniquely general ed. And then you see the distribution of at or above benchmark and then beneath benchmark for themselves.
Now I want to go, I was hoping to go, by the way, just so people don't know, another point of pride. I don't know how many this is and how it compares to others in the state. This year in Greenwich, we had 11 students who scored a perfect score on the science cap. I don't know how that happened, but that is a remarkable achievement. I don't know if it's better or worse than anybody else, but guess what? I think we should celebrate the heck out of that thing. I'm sure there are other tests we have where kids are getting perfect scores. And, I hope we will broadcast to people because it's a testament to the quality of the rigor in our schools. With, if I could go to the top line, essentially the portal, the tile view that we use.
Yes.
Phil, do you know to the degree, because we're dealing in percentile rank, it's a percentile rank.
That's
It's
correct.
how we are performing versus someone else,
That's correct.
right? You can have a debate about was it the best way to do it, but that's what we do. So when I look at being 81st in this year, I don't have a sense of, are we 81st because we're standing still and everybody else stood around it? Or I don't have a sense of the improvement that is driving that number versus where you're stack ranking against other people in the state. Do you have anything that could illuminate that?
For that one we do, there was a news report that actually said that there was a dip in ELA. So what we found is we had less of a dip in ELA than the rest of the states.
Okay.
But that is the danger in the percentiles.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that, are you really measuring your own system or are you measuring against,
Right.
right, how other
Right.
people are doing in the state? So
Right.
that would be the only caution with the percentiles because they're always going to be moving.
Yeah.
But so that,
I think
but
it's
there was a
important
dip
just to-
statewide.
Right, I don't know that I would, I mean, we could have a conversation about changing it, but I'm always weary to change something in the middle of a plan, right? But my point is, it seems we need that, I'm just interested to understand what were the drivers of that. And then I'm also interested to understand the prediction thing. I mean, that would be wonderful if that turned out to be true. I'm really interested because it's relative to everybody else moving. I know we can predict what we might do.
Yeah, the
But-
assumption is, and I apologize for not footnoting it here, the assumption is that all other districts remain the same as they did.
Remain the same. Okay. So, but just in terms of what the drivers were in math, ELA math, and if you could just illuminate that. Is it mostly, what were the drivers of that performance?
Math, we actually grew faster than the rest of the state.
Yeah, so the state improved on average in math, and we, to Dr. Gilday's point, improved that much more fast than the rest of the state.
That's great news.
So quantitatively, that's the story. Qualitatively, that's,
Do you know what was the average in the state? Do you know, or what was?
I'm not recollecting off the top of my head.
I'm trying to, because I'm going back to connecting to the comment, one second. I'm connecting to the comment that Ms. Erickson made about some of the younger grades. I know mathematics has been a challenge in the state of Connecticut generally, right? We've generally performed well, but I know we do have some pockets of kids where we need attention. So it was great that it went from 82 to 90. That's terrific. I was just trying to understand how much of this reflected on absolute growth.
Yeah.
Do you know by chance?
Not
Okay.
on quick recall, but I can provide it to you as follow-up.
Okay. And the last content question I had was,
I know it's on it, so do you want to?
Yeah, so ELA statewide was 54.2%, and then this is all grades, just 45.6. Meet or exceed levels 3 and 4.
okay.
And Greenwich was, I believe, 74% under both benchmarking now? So
And then-
74%.
And then my last question was, what am I to take away from the red stoplight, red Harvey Ball stoplight on tests with expected or greater growth? What do I need to know about that?
Yeah, so that is very much a reach goal. It requires focus. It requires focus. To have the rate of growth of students throughout the system accelerate requires focus, and it is mathematically challenging.
Yeah, so, but my question is did you mark that red because of just where we are? Is it the prediction going forward?
So it's red because the model expects
Right.
more than, that we land more than 5 percentage points away from that documented goal of 90%. The model expects that we'll get to 84%.
Okay.
So that is red because it's what I would poetically call a reach goal. It's
Okay.
not likely to happen unless there's a significant intervention there.
Right. And at this meeting, we got written report on, which I will tell you, I've not read on school improvement plans, so presumably that would be connected to that. Right, that's the outcome, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I think it was Ms. Dayton had her hand up.
I was fortunate as a CAVE board member to have a meeting with the commissioner this month and state board members. And I want to pass along something that seems to be really worthwhile as a data point for our district. And I'm not trying to, what is the expression, overturn the apple cart. But the commissioner said they now have factual evidence that the use of the SBA benchmark assessments produces better results than the use of STAR benchmark assessments. And they've looked at it across many, many districts. I believe the SBA benchmark assessments are not anywhere near the very expensive cost of STAR. So I would love you to do your own data analysis and come back to us because we want to invest in things that work at a good price.
Yeah, thank you. That's something that's very much something we've been looking at.
Could I just ask one question about what Ms. Dayton just said?
Yes.
Has the state, I mean, it was a Gorby, has the state changed and made the SBA something that a school district can use and implement at will, or execute at will, like with STAR? Because that did not used to be the case.
That wasn't the case.
Is it the case now? When did that
They're
happen?
called the interim assessments. So
I
the
see.
interim assessments have been around, but it's a platform that you have to build. It's a significant lift on the district.
I see.
So where STAR is already built and benchmarked, just has to be. But we would have to build that in blocks, and once that's built, then you can.
Yeah,
That's up to you guys.
We do
We're very
have
much
some.
looking at it. With Dr. Gilday coming on board, we're very
You
much
guys-
looking at it.
We have to remember, though, that the interim assessments will not be adapted, whereas STAR is adapted. Again, it's purpose and platform.
I'm going to rely on the experts on this one, at least me personally. Ms. Applebaum.
So I'm just wondering if we can draw some positive correlations. So, we have our school day SAT, which is giving a certain amount of information, and I'm going to math in particular. And it shows some gaps and things that, for current high school students. And then I look at the overall scores for the entire district, which are very positive, although there may be some small pockets. Can we extrapolate from that what is going on in the lower grades as it moves up will produce better or different results when we get up into the school day SAT, say 2 or 3 years from now?
Depends which
Yeah.
classes the kids sign up to take and what exposure they get, because this ninth grade SAT, of course, is a college entrance exam, right? So it depends where the kids have focused their energy and the courses they're taking, because doing well on the SAT means that you've had some exposure to advanced level concepts. So if the kids are only signing up for Algebra 2 and not pre-calc,
That's some of
they're
the
going to miss
deeper-
some of the questions, so, just because they won't have had exposure to that. So
So,
part of it is it depends on where the kids are focusing.
so just quickly, dovetail on the comments, we're not in a position right now where we could say, oh, there's a strong, tailwind pushing people forward, given what we know now. And a lot of the work, and Jim House in the audience, a lot of the work we were doing over the summer was trying to narrow down where exactly is the critical path in math, kind of that 3 to 12. That's one of the things we would talk about in the data retreat, so I'm not going to unfurl that right now.
However, when we jump into coding at all grade levels, you're going to see math scores go up because you're going to see kids using logic a little differently. And I know Sheila and Irene and Phil have already started looking at all of that information as well.
Mr. Bernstein.
Phil, if you could just flip down on page section 2 of the charts. Yeah, wait. I'm just trying to figure out how the numbers add up. You've got 100% of the total on the right-hand side, but are you saying the kids in free and reduced lunch are counted once, kids in ELL are counted once,
That's
kids in
correct.
2? Okay.
That's correct.
So I don't have a sense as we see here the population of each of those buckets, but is that something you're
Yeah,
trying?
that's the point. You have to apply the percentages to the end that he has at the end.
So what I tried, and I was trying to, I wanted to communicate a lot of information simply. So the way you would read this is 74.3% of the 4,074 students are discretely general ed, just general ed. 8% of the students of the 4,074 are just within the special ed program. 9.8% of the students, or 9.8% of the 4,074 students are free or reduced lunch not being counted in the general education population, just kind of reporting on them.
But not being counted into more statuses either, or not special.
Or not,
EL.
correct, so they are just free and reduced price lunch.
Gotcha.
Two or more statuses may contain any combination
Combination,
or a combination of the two within the argument. Correct. It was the format of slide we had kicked around last year a little bit, and we got some discussions going, so I thought
You can drive yourself crazy trying to figure that out.
And again, once you do a data retreat,
Any
you
other-
disaggregate those more. So once you do the data retreat,
yeah, we have to drill down, we have heads behind that, yes.
Any more questions for Mr. Dunn?
Not a question.
I'm sorry, now we're going to talk, are we on to next steps?
I was actually just going to make a comment because I feel like if I keep saying this, then maybe we can help it happen, which is you had asked anything that we can do to help this process occur. And I know that based on the article that we just got through, one of the things that we can help is to give our administrators the time to get this stuff, to get through into the classrooms, to get down to the classrooms, to reinforce these things so that these, use of data, is learning how to do these things, these observations are occurring. And I think that's part of what we want to try and do.
Okay, so let's just talk about next steps. I think there was a little bit of a discussion here about a data retreat, but just by way of clarification. How long, who attends, what frequency, what's the administration thinking about?
Annual board admin team, and probably 2-3 hours.
Okay, so the question is when is the administration like to propose to have the first one? Well, annual is once a year, so not more than that. Okay, when would you like to have that? The first one? January. Okay, probably good.
That new board's gonna be busy.
Yeah, I think to Jennifer's point, I mean, obviously we can pull, Jennifer, some of those program things you were wanting to look at, because I can grab that right out of the ECRIS portal. So I know exactly what kinds of things you're asking for, so that I can get sooner, but I would think.
We don't have ECRIS IDs, I know we do.
You would.
Right, yeah, I know we really do. Yeah, okay. So if there's maybe something that somebody wants, we
Right,
could
we can grab some
probably look at
things.
it without generating work for you guys, right? And then there may be extra stuff, but,
Yeah, I think Dr. Yoder,
okay. That, anything else on this subject?
And if we don't want a different evening for a retreat, what we could do is look at our agenda and just make one of them, one of the work sessions, call it data retreat, and just book it that way. So it's just one of your regular meeting times, but it has administration and board participation in that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you all. Thank you.
We'll now be discussing our 2018-2019 budget resolutions. Ms. O'Donnell. You ready? Or you can go ahead.
Water out of the tap.
Don't mind us.
Wow. The budget resolution that was included in the current year budget for FY18 is being presented now for discussion so that it can be included in the FY19 operating budget. At this time, I was recommending no changes, although I do need to point out that item G, the financial donations from the campaign for MISA, was actually stricken in the FY18 version, and so I don't know if we would strike it again.
Ms. Erickson.
So just for history, because I was the liaison to this for a while, this is a successor resolution to the previous campaign for MISA, which was an organization which since folded. It completed its work, so we finished. So this was a successor organization. So I think you're right that this one is not the right one, and there's a different one that needs to be in there. Because this still.
Wasn't it H?
Yeah, H is the one that governs. G should be stricken.
Right. That's so when we get the final G, will be stricken.
Right.
Okay.
This was, I read this a couple days ago and I see that it was updated. Was there something that was changed in here?
Ms. Erickson.
I don't have specific language, but under 41C, I'd like the administration to consider expanding this language. One of our budget limitations was to look at additional sources of revenue. This limits us to federal and state of Connecticut grants not listed above, whiwhich are the very traditional grants to the enumerated programs. up to 5,000. I'd like to consider adding grants from other vetted groups or organizations. We have a series of distinct policies that policy governance went through for the Alliance grants, so I think perhaps those policies could apply. But if we're looking for additional sources of revenue, we should expand our net. I also think we should consider expanding the amount from $5,000 to $25,000. I think that 5,000, this number has stayed stagnant for many, many years. And given the approval process to go through the BET and the RTM, if we can assure those bodies that we have policies which will make us not add additional staff or not have additional strengths in compliance with our policies, we should consider expanding the types of grants we can apply for and increasing the amount. As an example, and I was shocked, I thought for sure we had put in a mechanism so we didn't have to go back to the RTM for the Confucius grant for the Asian Society.
That's what I thought.
We inserted it, I think, in where we have the Greenwich Alliance in the Area 9 Cable Council, and I don't know why it's out. I looked 4 times, and I thought for sure we fixed that, but we didn't. So that would allow us to have that covered under this provision. The other thing I wanted to just mention, I don't know if this is true, but under on the next page, 42E, the rental of school buildings, I think that the town now does this for us, other than our partner organizations, and I think they collect the revenue, so I'm just not sure this is the most up-to-date language, and I would just ask that you check with the people at town finance to see if there's different language that we should include.
Ms. Reardon.
I wanted to thank you on the cover sheet for spelling out what the triple R was. I knew what it did, but I never knew what it stood for, so thank you.
Ms. Appleton.
I just wanted to add my support to the expanding the language to incorporate other well-vetted sources of grants. I do think that's something that we will need to do going forward, and to raising that threshold so that it doesn't cost more in time and energy to apply for a grant than what the grant itself would be able to provide for us. I want to facilitate people being able to do these applications as long as they fit within the policy structure that we've set up.
I'm not so savvy about this. So is this the thing that's restricting us to 5,000 that requires it to go? So if we change this, then we're not restricted anymore? Because I mean, for years I feel like I've heard there's this 5,000 number that has to go. So is this changing this document?
This is the figure that is the threshold for RTM approval, but if the RTM agrees to these resolutions, the BET before that, it would be the mechanism. It's like the way the Greenwich Athletic Foundation, the change was made, right? So we no longer have to go through that process. It streamlines the process.
Yeah.
This would do it. Okay.
It's kind of a comforting sound. So, Lori, we have uniquely versus other town departments, we have, we represented this at the RTM meeting in the last budget, that we have very well-developed and strict procedures for the acceptance of gifts and grants. So we have strong controls. Other departments don't have that, so that's why this threshold is, someone wants a review. I would hope that what the two of you might do is, I'd love to see it secured before we see this. I agree, if we can raise these thresholds so that the administrative review is within our organization and it's trusted by the other parts, the BET and the RTM, I would like to see that. I think, however, I don't think the right approach is us to write down a proposal and toss it over the wall to the BET or the RTM. I'd rather there be a dialogue with them that is proactive, so that when we're voting on a threshold, ideally that threshold has already been agreed, at least in concept, with the finance department, the members, on behalf of the members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I think the staff contact you guys would deal with would be Peter Minarski and his team. It would also be helpful, I don't know who in the RTM would, probably the Budget Committee, which is headed by Mike Warner. I'm sorry, Finance Committee, headed by Mike Warner. There's some other groups, I would start with Mike Warner. There's some other committees that will get involved, but it probably makes sense to start with them. It would be great if we could have this knowing that it would be well accepted and not modified when we submit our budget. So, that's my input. Anything else on this? Ms. Erickson?
Only that sounds like a lot of work to complete in the next couple of weeks if we want to vote on that, so I think we could probably help in that regard. I don't know how, but I think, unless we want to postpone the vote on this.
No, it sounds to me like it's 2 phone calls over 2 weeks. One phone call would essentially be to Peter Minarski, and the second phone call would be to Mike Warner at the RTM to have the discussion. If both of them say I'm not interested in it, doesn't mean we wouldn't do it anyway. Just be great if that were secured. If the threshold is 25,000, you guys want to go to a higher threshold. If you guys want to go to 50 to reduce the administrative load, that was the purpose of doing the gifts. I wouldn't even pick a nut. I mean, I think you need to have a dialogue with them. If it just turns out the way it is, that they're not interested or they don't want to talk about it or they're not available, then we'll deal with it as suggested. Maybe someone will make a proposal to raise this limit, and just suggesting proactivity rather than reactivity. But don't overdo it on the work, would be my suggestion.
I also want to just clarify that the $5,000 threshold is on federal government and state Connecticut grants. Is that what we're looking to raise? You're looking to.
She's also looking
To expand the universe of approved grant-giving organizations that are well vetted within our policies, and all of those 3 categories would be bumped. The reason I chose 25,000 is it just happens to be a recommendation by the League of Women Voters for the capital threshold. But I don't know if there's a lot of grants out there that are higher than 25,000 and it makes sense to go higher. That's perfectly fine with me. I mean, the idea is to reduce the obstacles to get money, so.
Anything further on this? I think you have our input. Looking forward to seeing the item. Wish you the best of luck with the other town departments.
Thank you.
We can help in any way, let us know. Is there anything further on budget resolutions? No. Okay. With that, now we're going to take up a recommendation on policy stewardship. This came out of a discussion in our retreat on transitioning from policy governance to the traditional model of governance, I guess it's called, with the support of the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education. Proposal from Ms. O'Neill from the Policy Governance Committee.
All right, so this is the first read of this policy revision, and it's pretty simply of the red line version there, and it's a transition from our traditional policy governance model to the case policy model, and also part of that in the red line you'll see that the policy is suggested that a policy could be changed with reading at a work session and 1 business meeting instead of 2. But there's always the caveat that if any time the board felt that a policy needed, more opportunity for discussion by the public, then that's always available. But that's the big change from moving from one form of policy, which would be a time saver for both the administration and the board, but more importantly, it will bring us into compliance with all the state and federal statutes in a much quicker way, because all the paid policies have already been vetted by lawyers, so that we don't have to rewrite them. Oops, sorry. Okay. So we don't have to rewrite them or get them vetted. It will save us time and money with the attorneys. It's just in the best interest of the board to move forward with this in terms of being up to date in terms of all our compliances. Anybody has any questions?
Ms. Dean.
I have no questions. I just want to offer my full support for a long overdue initiative that will streamline our work and help us focus on achievement.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that I think it's partly, being in compliance with regulations, but I think it's also just really fundamentally having it clear what we're doing in the district. Because I think, it's gotten to the point where sometimes we don't have everything we think we do, or it's not in the places we think it is. And so I think to have a system where it's very clear what the policy is, what the steps are that we're going to take with them, and then the regulations that go with it is going to help us, I think, function much better in the district.
So this will come back for a second read at the next business meeting.
Barbara, the one thing that I think we talked about in the retreat, and it's just not clear to me how this is going to play out. I fully support transitioning from current policy governance to another more effective and efficient policy model. The thing, though, that this caught me a little bit by surprise, because we had talked about, at least on the advice of Cade, is you had to plan the transition very, very carefully so that you're not betwixt and between the model, and you haven't necessarily created, that's why I think we need the help from Cade to do it, policy experts to actually help us do the transition. When I saw in here this draft, it seemed to be, and that's the part I don't understand, it seemed to be a through policy itself, we're actually already through this first one, G004, essentially we're shifting. And as I say, I supported the plan to shift. I just didn't know if Cade said, did Cade say to us, change this policy to start your shift?
But it seemed to me that we had to change, you can't have a dual system, so we had to use, I thought, the policy that we have now in place to amend that, to change it so we could move forward.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's a way for the board to, one of two things. One is there a motion we could make that isn't necessarily changing the policy to say we commit to fully shifting from one to the other? Or is there a way to get a hold of Cade and say, is this the right first step in that transition? If they tell us it's the right first step in the transition, then to me it's got the good housekeeping seal of approval.
So you've got a policy here, and what you're saying, so you don't have two policies saying different things, we're changing our policy so that makes it official to move forward.
Exactly right.
One of the things when we had the telephone conversation with Kate, one of the things that they had made a point about was that the current policies stay in place until you actively change them. So what we would be doing here is saying we're going to shift to this model, and whether we shift by category, by subset, one at a time, they actually gave multiple opinions on both sides, pros and cons of what was the best to do. It would not dictate one way or the other. Whatever policies we have stay in place until we actually vote to change them, and that's the benefit of the new piece of the one reading, is some of them will be very perfunctory, so we don't have to draw them out. We could do 5 or 6 at one time, and some of them may require a little more work and discussion, so we'll be able to do that.
So if you look at the red line, it actually clearly states we're actually using the guidance of the Cade policy model in the development of our policies. It doesn't say we're absorbing them lock, stock, and barrel. And all the policy changes are still dictated by this policy, which we will have to come to the board with suggestions as to what's staying, what's going. So any amendments of current policies, any policies that will be superseded, we have to be very, very clear in the direction from the Policy Governance Committee, and the board will have to actually proactively adopt for this to change anything. Otherwise, our current policies just remain in place, and the only change that's really happened from this is the number of readings it takes to actually move a policy.
The readings part I was fine with. I was on the top part of changing G004. Let me ask a different question. When will we get the full plan for the transition from, I thought we decided we were actually either retaining CAIG or they were providing the support. When are we going to get the full transition plan to get us from where we are over to the traditional model?
We discussed that at retreat with this, thanks. We discussed that at retreat, and I think we talked about going in sections.
I agree with that.
And then, well, more agree with that. So, and then to, one, because you can't have both sets of policies, so then you then negate the other policies. And that's what this is really doing tonight. We can't have a policy G004 and then make a motion separately that we're going to transition. So we are looking for some guide, not, we've had all the guidance right now that we need from CAIG. We're looking maybe for someone to help facilitate it. But we need to get going. I mean, we've discussed this over and over again.
Okay, so,
What's the next step?
yeah, are we going
Well,
to,
the next step is to read this at the next
Yeah, no, that
meeting,
part
the
I
next
got.
two, and then pass it, and then that frees PGC to go forward.
so is the expectation PGC is going to do this, transition all of this in a year, 2 years? What's the expectation?
Well, CAIG sort of said it's going to take probably 2 years to do it.
Okay.
I said I'd do one before I left.
Well, we're working on it. I've done it all.
Anything further on this item? Any questions? No? So it'll come to us in the next meeting. Okay, with that, we're on to essentially agenda plan.
It's back in the school year.
I have to extend the meeting.
It's a work session.
I'd like to extend the meeting till 10.
Yeah, fine. Oh, it doesn't matter. All those, I'll second it.
I don't want to do it twice.
Yes,
I've been
second.
before.
All those in favor of extending the meeting to 10 o'clock? All those against?
I wasn't against, I didn't vote for.
Yeah, so it's 7, 1, 0. Okay, agenda plan.
Okay, I only have a couple things here. One is just to adjust the master plan discussion points for the 19th to include the Cardinal Field feasibility study, and I think just a general fields discussion was just discussed. And then I had for tonight's meeting that there were 2 policy discussions. So one was the policy review / annual report that got deferred from earlier in the year, and then this policy revision. But it sounds like it was kind of one of those same. I just had them as 2 different items, so I just wanted to clarify that.
The annual review is a written report,
Okay.
already done.
So that was just, okay, so that comes up, and then the
That's-
data guide.
Kim, just so we're clear, that was at the, it's not showing at the last meeting, but I think it was submitted at the last meeting, wasn't it?
Was it?
Okay, we need to, we need
All right, I'll
we
check
need to
on it.
follow up.
I'll check on
that.
it.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the data dive that you discussed with the board and cabinet, I don't know, we'll just put that in to be scheduled for now, or?
Yes.
Yes.
It's gonna be to be scheduled, and just to make a notation of with the January. We probably need to look at the January agenda, but probably not right this minute. Okay. Other items? Okay, so our next, yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Erickson.
This is a real technicality, but on the next meeting, it's showing us consent agenda items, the school improvement plan, and the supplemental programs. I believe those are information only. I don't know that we act on them.
They're, part of
We
the
have to,
policy.
but we have to, under policy, we have to accept all monitoring reports. So that's why I think you're right. It was provided as a written report, but I believe,
It's not really a monitoring report.
I
it's a
know,
compilation.
that was why when I saw it marked MR, I just assumed, Kim, can you figure out what these are?
They are policy provisions, so that's why
If they're, right, they're, under the current system, they're required, but is anybody concerned about those items in any way beyond the
I do
technicality?
have one question on the office that's at the end.
Okay. I'm sorry, Kim, go ahead. Do you have any others?
I'll finish one.
Okay. So, just looking ahead, can we just talk about November, just to be sure we're all on board with the November agenda, because we've got a lot of changes relating to master plan and some other things that have moved out. Has everybody had a chance to look at the November 2 meeting, which is a work session, and then essentially the regular business meeting on the 15th? Of course, you can also see in here the budget meetings, which run on the special calendar that everybody knows about.
Did it say 17-18 BOE calendar on November 2nd?
Yeah, thank you.
We also have Dr. Court on November 9th, we might want to replace that.
I thought maybe you were going to do that.
I think that takes care of it. Anybody have any other questions, concerns, changes there?
Not necessarily related to the agenda plan, but to the calendar. We do have an item being referred to the RTM this month, so the sooner we can get our assignments for committees, districts. I don't know when your next meeting is, but if we could get that ironed out, I think we generally appear at those committee meetings and district meetings. Likewise,
Because we usually only go to individual districts when the item is budget. Are you suggesting that on this one, we assign and do what we do regularly on budget?
well, I'm suggesting that we should at least reach out to district leaders, and if they want us there, we should be prepared to go. And I also would suggest, because it's the BET budget guideline month, and the BET meets the same night as the RTM, that we just have our ducks in a row.
Yeah.
In
So
terms
we
of
first have to
calendar.
go to the committees that's going to be referred to, right?
And I'm not sure Monday what those are.
But
Yeah, Monday the 16th, they may be having a joint meeting too, there was talk about.
The call hasn't been published yet.
There was talk of a joint meeting.
So do people want to spend their time, do people want to go, do individual board members want to be assigned to go to an individual district? For example,
I actually, one of the district leaders was at the Central Middle School master plan meeting and specifically suggested that it would be beneficial to have board members at least speak to district leaders, if not speak to the districts.
Anybody, if people want to get, I'll tell you what, if anybody wants to do that, what we can do is, anybody who wants to do that, let's get to, who should organize that from the administration? Typically it's organized by,
It was organized by Jim's staff.
yeah, it was for budget, it was organized by Jim's staff, by Pat Spooner. Who would you like to have that organized by?
Ask Pat if she's there before and do a little summary for you.
No, I think we know what it is and how it works. We're using that, the discussion is using that model that's used for budget, which is well developed, and use it in this instance to assign people to.
Yes, yeah, she'll know exactly what that.
She will.
Okay.
She will. Okay. Okay.
They probably use the one that we did use for the last time around.
Okay.
You know.
Depending on people's calendar. So what we'll do is what Pat does is she typically reaches out to boards, say here they all are, tell me who can take what, and so on and so forth. That should sound as a straw man.
So the district meetings are the
Week before.
Wednesday and Thursday before the Monday after the RTM.
So Monday is the 23rd, so it's, I forget what that is, it's the 16th, 17th, 16th, 17th. Okay. Okay. Anything else on the agenda? Okay, I don't think we modified it, so there's no need to accept it. With that, Any other business? No. Mr. Bernstein?
Move to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor? We're adjourned.